Hey everybody, Dr. Clark here on The Place for Answers. Today I want to share with you some really interesting news about ADHD children and nutrient deficiencies. Now recently at a conference in Hawaii, a paper was presented in which they demonstrated that children that are diagnosed with ADHD have lower levels of three very important nutrients: zinc, copper, and lead. Now this replicates previous studies that have shown that these kids do have nutrient deficiencies. Now, interestingly, it was a study that was looking at the dietary habits of these kids and trying to correlate some things. Because most people think that ADHD children eat a lot of junk food, and that's why they're like the way they are. Well, it's obviously more complex than that. And what this study found out is that the real thing that these kids were missing, and I believe if I get the study quotation correctly, it's that 40% of the kids consumed less than the recommended levels of meat and meat alternatives. Now what this means is that all the micronutrients, or the small things that are in these foods, they didn't have. So we're not talking about sugar and carbohydrates. What we're talking about is these kids were not eating enough protein. Now one of the things that I do when I'm traveling around the country teaching other doctors about the brain and neurotransmitters and these things that help the brain communicate is that if someone is malnourished, they're not going to make neurotransmitters very well. Now, if you've been, watching, hearing about ADHD for a while, then you know that dopamine is like the big thing that everybody thinks of when they think of attention deficit disorder. And rightly so, dopamine is obviously an important factor. But what you need to do is, even though I don't have time to explain it to you, but if you look at the physiology behind how neurotransmitters are made in the first place, most of them start with having adequate intake of protein. So it makes sense to me that in this paper, they found that this group of ADHD kids diagnosed with that label ADHD, and you know how I feel about labels, they were not eating as much protein, not the recommended amount. So it's not surprising. They didn't even have the basic building blocks to even make the neurotransmitters. Now, in terms of specific minerals, it's been known that ADHD kids are low, some of them are low in zinc. Well, this found it again. But it's also the first study to demonstrate they have low copper. And also, as a side note, as they kind of buried in here, that a majority of the kids had serum ferritin levels of less than 50 micrograms per milliliter. Now, ferritin is basically a measure of how much iron your body has. Now, for me, when we talk about iron supplementation with the patient, 25 is pretty low. 50 is really not that much higher. So what they're saying in this study is that these kids, definitely the kids that they studied, had three big deficiencies: zinc, copper, and iron. Now I want to read you some just real specific numbers. They found that 77% of the children aged 6 to 9 years and 67% of the children aged 10 to 12 years, 70% of the kids had below laboratory normal. 67% of the kids had cutoffs below zinc deficiency, and serum copper lows were below laboratory for 23% of kids. This is a lot of those kids that have zinc and copper problems. Now, before you rush out and go buy zinc and copper and iron, don't do that. You need to have someone check your child out, do a thorough functional metabolic evaluation. And really, I don't expect your GP or your medical doctor, I don't expect them to really know how to do that. That's another discussion for another day. But I would encourage you to find someone that can do a functional evaluation, meaning looking for these ranges that aren't necessarily totally off the bottom end of the lab range. Because as you know about lab ranges, a lot of them are kind of jokey because they're really just based on a bell curve. You remember those from school? You take out the highs and lows and everything in between is normal. Well, that's a kind of a ridiculous definition for a normal lab range. But what I want you to walk away with is realizing that those minerals are cofactors, meaning they have to be there in order for your child to make serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, melatonin. Things, if you Google around, I don't really wish you would do that, but if you Google around, you'll see that those things are all related to kids that have these ADHD symptoms. But just supplementing with those things is not the key because all ADHD children, every one of them, has got both a neurological problem and a metabolic problem. And it's deciding and sussing out which one is which and how much of a problem, which way does the teeter-totter swing there, that's important in getting the kid the best relief and the longest term relief. The other thing I want you to take away is that you can do is your child needs to eat. Most of these kids are just protein deficient. And a lot of protein, if you correct the protein deficiency, who knows how much of a great impact that could have on their overall brain functioning. So copper, zinc, and iron, extremely important. I'm not surprised by that. We see it all the time. And don't rush out and go supplement. Find someone who can do this type of evaluation, get the right blood tests, know how to interpret them, and be able to put together a plan and do something simple like just helping your child eat more protein. I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.